Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, the podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name is Josh Lindell. I'm a grad student studying Neanderthal teeth, and today I'm here with
Fredrik Trusohamn, and I'm a Swedish archaeologist who dealing mostly with pseudoscience and especially ancient aliens. And I have a podcast called Digging Up Ancient Aliens, where I actually watch ancient aliens, and was not maybe my greatest idea in life, but hey, here we are.
Of course, you were here with us, I think 2 years ago, to review the movie Atlantis, The Lost Empire from 2001 from Disney. That was episode 44, and today we're recording episode 107, so that was actually quite a long time ago. Regular listeners are going to be aware that both Ross and Kim are missing today. Ross was scheduled to be away for this episode. Kim is mysteriously missing. I'm not sure what happened to her. Maybe she fell asleep. Maybe she will pop in halfway through this episode and join us. But today, you and I are going to review the movie Kon Tiki from 2012. Listeners might not be familiar with the Kon Tiki expedition, which is what the movie is, which the movie tells the true story of. Listeners might not also be aware of the interesting sort of connection between Kon Tiki and the last movie we did with you, Atlantis. And so I guess we're going to get into all of the pseudo-archaeology that both of those share in common. But to start off with, can I ask you to summarize the movie we just watched, Kon Tiki?
So the movie Kon Tiki is, well, based on a true story, as it claims. So we follow the adventurer Norwegian Thor Heyerdahl. So I might upset some Norwegians since I'm Swedish. But we follow his, cross-Pacific journey on a raft from South America to Polynesia. And the reason he did this is that he had this idea, and I think we will get into it a bit more later, that Polynesia was populated not from the Asia way, but from South America. And he wanted to show it was possible to sail from South America to Polynesia. And the movie follow his journey across the sea. We get a few key introduction to his theory, but they never really go into greater detail. And I think we will get to that too a bit later also. But it's an adventure movie, I would say. Not much archaeology in that sense that was covered.
This is going to be an episode where we're talking about everything the movie doesn't say rather than anything the movie does say. So, yeah, it's a true story based on true events. As far as I can tell from what people have written about it, it seems like the movie is pretty accurate to real-life events. We usually start off our discussion by nitpicking the historical or scientific inaccuracies in our movies. There's a few inaccuracies in this one. I don't think that's going to be the interesting thing that we're going to talk about today, though. So I don't know if you noticed any little inaccuracies that you want to mention before we move on to our sort of bigger picture questions about this movie.
Not any huge one. There was really that thing about waves towards the end of the movie.
The 13th wave.
Yeah, that waves comes in a series of 13 all the time. And there are, sure, a bit truth to it, but wave caravans tend to march in 3 or 16 waves or somewhere in between. It's hard to really foresee how many waves it will be. And also, it's very nitpicky, very nitpicky, but in the movie around minute 56, there's a Swedish song that one of the crew members play, and they actually get part of that wrong. So they switch place on 2 words, and that song is made by Evert Taube, a Swedish musician, and I kind of reacted to that because it's a very traditional Swedish song.
Yeah, that's what I think the inaccuracies in this movie are. They're really sort of specific, nitpicky things that are, not really that important to the movie. One of the things that people have complained about online, particularly the family of Herman Watzinger, who is one of the characters who is on the raft in this movie, is that they sort of rewrote his character to make him kind of not great. He's sort of scared the whole movie about the raft falling apart, and he's, doing things out of fear that are causing problems for everybody. Like he gets scared of a whale shark, so he throws a harpoon at it, but then the shark pulls the boat around and stuff. Apparently he didn't do that. Apparently they did harpoon a whale shark, but it was a different one of the characters, and everybody was cheering him on. And so his family complained that they characterized him kind of badly. And in fact, I read a quote from the writer or the director where they said basically the problem with this movie is that all of the crazy stuff really did happen the way they show it in the movie, and all of the boring, mundane stuff is where they had to dress it up in like all of the drama between the characters, because apparently the whole event went off sort of without a hitch, and everybody was sort of in good spirits and not fighting, and so they had to sort of fabricate that social drama for the movie. The details are pretty good. We could nitpick a few other small historical inaccuracies, but I think we should probably spend our time talking about the real big picture stuff. The movie is really it's pretty interesting to watch. It's a pretty good movie. The CGI, there's a lot of sharks in the movie, and I believe they're all CGI, and that stuff looks amazing. But as far as I'm concerned, there's two really egregious omissions from this movie that really change the whole sort of narrative. And I wonder if you agree with me, if you can identify what you think the two egregious omissions are. The first one, I would say, is that they never actually state in the movie that Thor Heyerdahl's theory was wrong. And I think that's a really big deal. Because you get to the end of the movie and you're like, oh, great. So he proved that indigenous Polynesians came from Peru, because that's what he's trying to prove in the whole movie and with his expedition, right? And they never, ever say that in the movie. He's got this big theory that Polynesia was settled from the east, from Peru. And then he does this expedition as sort of experimental archaeology to prove it was possible to do that. And then the movie ends and you're like, oh, great. He proved it. I guess that's the truth of the matter. And that's just, at the time, everybody knew that was wrong. And they're like, you're crazy. That's not how it happened. We know how it happened. And today we still know it was the same. But like, I watched this movie with my girlfriend and she's like, if I wasn't watching this with you, I would have thought he proved that Polynesia was settled from Peru. So I wonder what you think about that aspect of the movie.
Yeah, they kind of leave the whole idea blank, because Heyerdahl's theory is more complicated than just they settled from Peru. And now it's ancient DNA studies has shown there might be a connection between Polynesia and South America. Question is in what direction, and the DNA studies is in living population and not archaeological remains, as far as I understand them. So there can be a connection between South America and Polynesia that would make Thor Heyerdahl partially correct. So we have these studies, and it was published in Nature. I think I actually have that somewhere here. Yeah, Native American gene flow into Polynesia predating Easter Island settlements from 2020. So there could be something to it, but again, the article itself states that they can't really prove in what direction the connection would have been. It could have been Polynesians going to South America, bringing people back, or South Americans going to Polynesia, vice versa. So I remember there was a lot of writing in the papers that it proved Heyerdahl correct. And Sure, part of it, potentially, but again, more evidence and more DNA tests and archaeological remains would help prove the theory correct. What they all leave out is the big part of Heyerdahl's theory, that while it was South American who populated Polynesia, they leave out that he claimed there was white South Americans, white people from South America, the culture bringers, the culture bearers, came to Polynesia and then was slaughtered by the primitive savages that settled from the west, so to say.
Yeah, that's the second big egregious omission, the whole racism of the whole thing, and how that whole idea has no basis in archaeology or ethnography or anything else, but it does have a basis in this like hyperdiffusionist thinking. I should say bingo. We play this caveman movie Bingo every time we do an episode, and hyperdiffusionism is one of these tropes that we see over and over. And so, of course, we've talked about hyperdiffusionism on this podcast in the past. Hyperdiffusionism is this idea that there's usually supposed to have been a single progenitor culture that sailed all around the world and spawned every other civilization. And the reason it's racist is because usually that original culture which diffused around the world is said to be white, which is exactly what Thor Heyerdahl says. And by the way, we should say we watched this fictional, or this not fictional. We watched this drama, this movie from 2012, but there's also a documentary film called Kon Tiki from 1950, which is actually the documentary that Heyerdahl produced from the actual trip, which actually has footage that he filmed during that trip. And in this movie, they spend a lot of time showing him actually filming the trip that they're on. Did you ever watch any of that documentary?
A long time ago, but it's like the movie, but more old-timey, and the actual people is represented.
And Kim has just arrived on our Discord chat here. Kim, can you hear us?
Sorry, I thought it was at 9.
So, Kim, just to catch you up, we've been talking about the movie Kon Tiki from 2012, and we've decided, or I said, that there are two sort of egregious omissions from this movie. And they are that, first of all, the movie never says that Thor Heyerdahl's theory was incorrect. And second of all, the movie omits the whole racist element behind his theory. And so we were just talking about hyperdiffusionism and all of these early 20th century hyperdiffusionist thinkers that are sort of establishing this idea that there was this original, usually white progenitor culture that spawned all of the civilizations around the world.
Yeah, I read that in the Wikipedia thing that he thought that like tall, white, redheaded people were there and did that, and then they left.
Yeah, so his idea was that these people came from Mesopotamia, through Egypt, then to Bolivia and Peru, and from there they came to Polynesia because they got thrown out by the savage Inca, who just destroyed everything and were so too primitive. So they were forced to leave South America and head to Polynesia, where they settled as the first wave of immigrants. And then you have the second wave of what Heyerdahl referred to them as Maori Polynesians. And again, the Maori Polynesians were skilled navigators, but they were brave warriors and savages. They had no understanding of culture bringing, stonework, and all of that.
We were also just talking about the Kon Tiki documentary from 1950, which Heyerdahl filmed himself during the voyage, and which I believe won an Academy Award in 1951.
Yeah.
He also wrote a book about his travels called, I can't remember, Kon Tiki something subtitled. I think the subtitle changed. I think it was written in 1948. in Norwegian and translated into English in 1950. And in that book, he really clearly lays out his theory of this white ancestry of this race of people in his first chapter. It's really, really explicit that he's talking about these white foreigners that came into Peru from the north and were seen essentially as gods. Because that's where the name Kon Tiki comes from, right? Kon Tiki is allegedly supposed to have been an alternate name for the Peruvian sort of creator god Viracocha. If that name sounds familiar to our listeners, it's because we've talked about Viracocha in other pseudo-archaeology, hyperdiffusionist episodes. Graham Hancock talks about Viracocha in the episodes of Ancient Apocalypse, which we reviewed. Right. So we can pretty clearly see this tying in with all of the standard pseudo-archaeology, hyperdiffusionist, white Aryan master race stuff, right?
Yeah, and Heyerdahl has inspired Van Daniken and as you mentioned, Hancock, Giorgio Tsoukalos, all of those in their own theories, while Heyerdahl doesn't really talk about ancient aliens. His ideas has been, of course, picked up by ancient aliens.
Mm-hmm. Because it's all hyperdiffusionism, right? Yeah. It's all some flavor of hyperdiffusionism.
And something important to note there about Heyerdahl is that even if you could understand his hyperdiffusion stand somewhat in 1940, 1930, he still kept on to this hyperdiffusion idea until 2002 when he died. He never really recanted that or changed those ideas. And he goes into more details about especially the white people origin in his American Indians in the Pacific. That's from 1952. In his book Fatuhiva, Back to Nature in 1974. The Bearded Gods Before Columbus in 1979. So it was something he kept on promoting. And when he died, he was planning an excursion to Russia and Azerbaijan to try to find the true origin of the god Odin that he thought was a real man. And again, a culture bearer who brought civilization to the barbaric north somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these books you're mentioning, his original Kon Tiki book and the, what was it called? The American Indians in the Pacific. These books are available on Internet Archive, and I was looking at them. So I'll post links to these books in the show notes as well.
It's completely irresponsible for the movie to just ignore all of that and make this like myth-making hero movie, right?
Yeah, but I think that Heyerdahl would have loved it himself because he was a good myth maker about himself. There's not an error really in the beginning, but early in the film we see how he tried to get his book American Indians in the Pacific published, and people says, no, this is just far out ideas. And while to some extent it's true, he was also quite accepted as I think it's Victor Melander who wrote about the Heyerdahl myth building, that he wasn't really excluded, he was invited in and really part of the conversations. But since he wasn't an academic, since he couldn't really promote his idea in an academic fashion, there was a bit of lacking from the scientific community regarding his ideas, but he wasn't really this outsider that he wanted to be portrayed as. He was part of the discussions. He went on to do decent archaeological work on Easter Island or Rapa Nui. But again, this is myth building. He wanted to be David, just as Graham Hancock wanted to be David and the scientific community be the Goliath. So it's again these outsiders who want to promote an idea and isn't really suppressed, but they're lacking, the understanding on how the scientific process works and how you formulate a good argument. If you read American Indians, you're noticing that it lacks index. You can't really see chapters. Sources are a bit everywhere. And
yeah, it is. When I was researching for this episode, reading through his books, trying to find where he's talking about specific things in the books is frustrating. It's pretty. And American Indians in the Pacific is like 900 pages long. It's a disaster to read that book.
Yeah, and he doesn't really account for research that's already taken place. He tends to leave things out. His argumentation is very one-sided, that he is correct and everybody else has just missed it so far. And then if something says otherwise, he kind of just gloss over it.
Now, at the end of this movie, it does that sort of Breakfast Club ending where they write a sentence about where everybody is now and what they're doing. And the last line of the entire movie is about Thor Heyerdahl. He continued to better mankind through science and exploration up until his death at the age of 87. Considering what we're saying about him, do we feel like that's true? Did he really continue to better mankind through science? Or did he ever really do science?
Not in the way that he wanted to be remembered. Again, I think it's Melander who puts it quite well. He wrote an article called David's Weapons of Mass Destruction. And there he says that he furthered, or he kind of alludes to that, Heyerdahl kind of further our understanding of history by people who want to prove Heyerdahl wrong.
Yeah, so that's, you mentioned, this is one of the things this movie does, which really sort of aligns him with Graham Hancock, which is that it presents this, he's the underdog, science is arrogant and set in their ways, and they are resistant to new ideas even though they're wrong. And it really sets that up at the beginning where he's going to all these different publications and everybody's saying, you're wrong, we're not going to support this. And the narrative it's building is that he's right and he gets vindicated in the end. And of course, that didn't actually happen in real life. And so the movie just sort of ignores that part and never really resolves that, and just now the movie's over. They landed on the island. And so that's I feel is really insidious. And it's one of the, like, the movie is an entertaining adventure, but like the impact of this movie I feel is extremely deceitful for that reason. And I think that it could have this really negative impact of presenting archaeologists the way Graham Hancock is doing it, and people were going to come away from this movie thinking that archaeologists are closed-minded and that we have been for 100 years. And this is a great example where that just wasn't true. You just can't come in as an underdog with no knowledge of the field and prove the whole field wrong, right?
No, and again, the field invited him in. That's the big issue for the movie, that he wasn't excluded. He wanted to be portrayed as that in his memoirs and his writing, but he wasn't really pushed out. But yeah, they had concerns regarding his, methodology approach and how his argumentation was, as I said, one-sided. And that, I mean,
Sorry, I was just going to say, we see that attitude nowadays, even with researchers who, because their methodology or results or interpretations are called into question, they say that they're being bullied or pushed out or something, right? Instead of just engaging with the scientific process. So it's too bad that we're still seeing that even today.
Yeah, I think there's no easy way from it other than having more of it in education settings where you have to defend your ideas and theories and participate in that process, because it brings the field forward, that you have to go back and look over your methodology, over your results, see if you can tweak it and address the concerns other people have, instead of just, claim that you're bullied. And sure, it has happened in archaeology, bullying or unfair levels of how much evidence you need to have for a claim, but that's something that can be addressed. But you can't just say I'm bullied and then leave the room.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to sort of express the nuance that's actually involved in real work. Like, one of the things that comes up a lot, Graham Hancock still pulls up this one, is the Clovis first hypothesis, right? Which talks about the earliest inhabitants of the Americas. The Clovis first theory says that basically the Clovis people, the people that made the Clovis technology, which is characterized by these sort of distinctive spear points, it said that they were the first people in the Americas, and so they would have traveled down this ice-free corridor through the ice sheets covering Canada, and ended up in the American Southwest around 13,500 years ago. And we find Clovis technology starting about that time. And so at first it made a lot of sense. This was the oldest stuff we'd ever found. It aligned with this ice-free corridor, and so it was the prevailing theory until we started finding sites that were older. And as we started finding sites that were older, this means that you can't cross that ice-free corridor because it hadn't opened up yet, so they must have taken a different route into the Americas. And there was resistance to changing this theory at the time because it made perfect sense and because the evidence that was coming in was not very good evidence for a very long time. And so Graham Hancock and other people still pull this up as an example of archaeologists being stuck in our ways and closed-minded and resistant to change. But really, this was an example where we're supposed to be resistant because in order to overturn this theory, we need good evidence. And it took a while for a preponderance of evidence to come in that sort of reached this threshold where now it's undeniable, now we have to change the theory. The other problem with it is that Graham Hancock is still talking about Clovis first as if we haven't let go of it, but it was dead in the 1990s.
Yeah.
Like, I took my first archaeology class in 2005, and I was taught Clovis first as a dead hypothesis at that time. And so that's another area where we have this lack of nuance, right? Yes, archaeology was resistant because that's how science is supposed to work. We're supposed to make people defend their new research and prove that it's valid. And sometimes that takes a while, but we did change our theory once there was a preponderance of evidence to support the new theory and to discredit the old one. And so I think sometimes it's hard to express that nuance because, yes, sometimes we are wrong and it takes a little while for new evidence to come in and overturn old theories, but also that's how it's supposed to work. That's not necessarily a problem with the system, right?
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things that bothered me about this movie is the sort of, I mean, it's tied in with the Thor Heyerdahl's whole theory of white gods, which is the portrayal of indigenous people in this movie. We don't have much portrayal of indigenous people. We have allegedly Polynesian people on Tahiti, because the movie starts when he's basically on vacation in Tahiti with his wife. People have criticized that scene.
Thailand.
Yeah, people have criticized that scene because they're not Polynesian. They're filming it in Thailand. The actors are Thai. The things that they're doing, they're weaving rattan baskets and they're carrying a certain type of spear. And these are Thai artifacts. They're not Polynesian artifacts. So the movie doesn't really depict any Polynesian people at all, despite it being all about Polynesia. But Thor Heyerdahl's theory, right, that Polynesia was settled from Peru from the east rather than being settled from Southeast Asia from the west, as we know it actually happened based on archaeology and as we knew it happened at the time, which is why he was experiencing resistance. This is framed as him sort of honoring indigenous oral tradition, whereas the scientific community was not paying attention to the indigenous oral tradition and the indigenous evidence, when really it's exactly the opposite, right? The reason he believed Polynesia was settled from the east is because he's cherry-picking ethnographic evidence, and a lot of it coming from Spanish conquistadors rather than actual indigenous South American stories. And also discrediting the capabilities of Polynesian seafarers, because basically in the movie, it's presented as the first time he gets this idea is his wife asked him, isn't it amazing that these Polynesian people were able to settle these islands from the Southeast Asian mainland paddling against the current? She's like, wow, they must have been so capable that they were able to paddle against the current to find all these islands. He's like, yeah, it would be easier if you came from the east, then you would just have to flow with the current and you didn't actually need any skill. And so when he created this raft, he intentionally made it unsteerable to basically prove that you don't have to be a competent seafarer. And in fact, nobody on his boat was a competent seafarer. I think, at least according to the movie, only one of the how many people are on this raft? 6 or 8 people?
Yeah, a 6, I think.
Only one of them had any prior seafaring experience. And so he made a boat that they can't steer, that they can only drift aimlessly on the currents, and filled it with people who were not competent seafarers. And he did prove that you could accidentally float from Peru to Polynesia without any skill at all. And what he's doing in that process is basically saying Polynesian people were too primitive. He actually says this in his book a lot. They're Stone Age people. Everybody else on Earth at the time when Polynesia settled had left the Stone Age, and the only people still in the Stone Age were people from the Americas and people in Polynesia. And basically, they hadn't developed metallurgy yet, whereas everybody else on Earth had. Of course, this has nothing to do with how primitive a people are. It's just the technology that they're using. But he could not believe that Stone Age people were so good at navigating the ocean that they could have intentionally sailed and navigated their way from island to island. He's like, they couldn't have done that. They must have just accidentally floated on the currents from South America to Polynesia. He proved that that can happen, but basically the whole reason he did it is because he didn't think that Polynesian people could possibly be capable seafarers. And so the movie presents him as like a hero of indigenous knowledge, when in actuality, it's totally the opposite. He couldn't believe they were capable of doing it and tried to prove that they could have done it without being capable.
Yeah, and I kind of found that part a bit lacking in general. So I think it's the 1937 Marquez scene that you're referring to. So him and his wife went to Marquez for a zoological kind of expedition, but also they had this kind of Rousseau-like idea that they would become one with the nature and live off the land there. So in 1937 they were in Indonesia and again tried to live like in the natural state of humanity. And a lot of things happened during that trip that they kind of gloss over. For example, the looting of human remains is completely left out of the movie. And they did not really have this wonderful scene that we see in the movie. They actually had a lot of struggles. Both, they couldn't really live off the land. They starved, they got sick, and they also got problems with the local population, because they didn't respect traditions, they looted their graveyards and didn't really behave according to the customs there. Sure, some tried to defend it, that Heyerdahl took or was taken advantage of by the locals in some sort of trade agreements where they got kind of tricked out of their stuff by the locals. But again, it's a very one-sided, very Rousseau-like scene we get in Rousseau that don't really match with reality and the actual experience on Fatuhiva and Marquez.
I thought it was absolutely insane too that he didn't know how to swim. Like, when did you take swimming lessons beforehand?
Well, I don't know particularly about these guys in this movie, but I do know that there is like a tradition among sailors where they would intentionally not learn how to swim because they were like sort of superstitious about it. Like you're sort of asking for trouble if you know how to swim. And also if your ship sinks, knowing how to swim is just going to, prolong your death, right? So I don't know if that has to do with this case here, but I do know that there is a tradition of sailors intentionally not learning how to swim.
Yeah, I guess. I think you just want to go for a swim at some point. They spent so much time just sitting there in this beautiful ocean. You think you'd want to go for a swim.
I did read somewhere, not sure exactly where, but that Heyerdahl had a bit of complication with water after accidents in his youth, as we see in the beginning of the movie when he jumps on the ice floats. Was not uncommon in Scandinavia they call it jumpa, that you jump from ice block to ice block. My grandfather and grandmother both did that as youth when the lakes start to open up and their parents were very angry at them for.
Yeah, I can't imagine jumping from ice block to ice block. But
No.
maybe if you're on a lake rather than a river like we have here in Winnipeg, jump in the river in Winnipeg, you're going to get sucked under that ice and you're not coming back up.
Yikes. I also thought it was crazy that they, for a long time, still put on their suspenders and their ties and like their full suits too in the movie. Like, you'd think you would just be in your boxers the entire time or naked.
Well, I mean, they pretty much were by the midpoint of the movie, but yeah, it is pretty weird to see them in their full 1940s suits and ties on this boat leaving the mainland.
Yeah, I wonder how accurate that would be because, again, Heyerdahl seemed to be the back to nature kind of guy, so wouldn't picture him in tie and slacks on that raft.
There were a few questions I had that weren't specifically addressed in the movie. They might have been in the documentary. I skimmed through the documentary, but I didn't watch the whole thing in detail. And one of Thor Heyerdahl's whole things is that he wanted to prove that this could happen with Stone Age technology. So he was really resistant to any modern technology. They did have a radio and a compass and a sextant and stuff like this, but he said basically this is incidental to the actual trip because they couldn't steer. So they, if they didn't have any of that navigation equipment, the trip would have taken the same course. So, he's like, it's incidental. But I wanted to know where they're getting their water from, right? Because they have to be getting fresh water. They must have packed in fresh water. Late in the movie, they need to build an anchor where they're sort of waiting out the waves over that reef, which we talked about right at the beginning. The anchor was made up of tin jerry cans, it seems, and so I assume those were the water cans that they packed in. But if they're packing water in metal canisters, that doesn't seem to be Stone Age technology. So I wonder how he was accounting for people surviving, where they were getting their water from on this 101-day voyage in the Stone Age.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I can see a couple of ways that you could kind of use heat and sun to get the salt water out of the water, but
collect rainwater.
Yeah, that too.
I mean, Polynesians really did navigate the ocean, so obviously the Polynesians would have had ways to get water. I don't actually know what they are, but I feel like that's sort of disingenuous in terms of the experiments to be packing your water in metal canisters, right?
Yep.
Well, they had powder soup with them, as we see in the shark scene.
Tomato soup mix. The scene is quite funny because the Americans had given them some sort of shark repellent that they wanted them to test. And then there's a scene where the white sharks show up for the first time. And a guy's dumping this powdered packet in the water. And another guy says, "Why are you giving the sharks our soup?"
My big question at the end of the movie, when they were on the beach and it all seemed so emotional and they, it took a while and then they celebrated, was whether it was actually worth it for them or not. Like, it seemed like it was, but really why? To me, they didn't really answer the question that they were setting out to answer. And they just kind of put their lives at risk and suffered for 101 days to say they did it. To die a hero's death, potentially.
That it was possible. One of them did die that way. One of them did die skiing to North Pole.
I guess. I mean, maybe I'm just not that committed to my career, but I just don't think it's worth it.
Kim, maybe it's important that they're all men. Maybe this is a masculine impulse to prove your worth or something.
One of those gendered risk assessment things.
Yeah, I don't have that need either. But I guess it's at the end of the era of exploration where all the Antarctic explorers were dying and starving and...
Yeah.
And this was just following World War II. Some of the guys on this boat had fought in World War II. So maybe your attitude towards life is a little different after you've been through an experience like that.
Yeah, true. Do you think they wanted to go sailing again after that, or to the pool or swimming or beach day? Or do you think they were just done?
Oh, Thor Heyerdahl had various other expeditions on the ocean after this.
Yeah,
really?
he built a bunch of other boats. He tried to prove his theory that the white culture bearers in South America came from Egypt. So he had his papyrus raft built, Ra. That one sunk, but there was other attempts. Ra 2 sailed after that actually succeeded to get to between South America and Africa. And I think he has several other boat trips too.
Another thing that I learned in my research, and actually I had heard in the past as well, because I listened to Andrew Kinkella's pseudo-archaeology podcast episode on Kon Tiki. There was an expedition from Hawaii using a traditional Polynesian sort of outrigger canoe, like a double-hulled canoe, called the Hakulea, which was built in Hawaii, and it was sailed using traditional Polynesian techniques from Hawaii to Tahiti in 1976. And they like really sailed this, not like Thor Heyerdahl's expedition here, where he made up a nonsense boat based on his raft, by the way, is supposed to have been based on stories from the conquistadors about what kind of boats were used in Peru at the time or something like that. It's not really based on any real evidence as far as I know. But this Hakulea boat was based on real Polynesian boats. And basically what happened is, like, Polynesia was settled by all these, seafaring peoples over a few thousand years. But that seafaring knowledge was lost in the modern era, when now we have, modern navigation techniques. And so this ancient technology, this ancient knowledge was lost. But there were like 6 people on Earth who still had this ancient knowledge of seafaring without modern technology. And so they brought in one of these people to Hawaii, because nobody in Hawaii still retained this knowledge. And this guy taught them how to sail this boat. They sailed it from Hawaii to Tahiti. And then in the years afterwards, I believe this boat still exists, they've sailed it to every single Polynesian island. So there's like thousands of islands. They've sailed it all around Polynesia to every major island group, using the traditional knowledge to prove and to regain this knowledge, right? Like to refigure out how to sail using these indigenous Polynesian techniques. And I was reading a little bit about the techniques that they use, and they're really interesting. Like, there's the obvious stuff like the stars. If you understand the stars really well, you can navigate really well with the stars. They used the sun rising and setting. They used other really interesting techniques as well, like this main guy who taught them how to do this again can basically feel their orientation based on the ocean swells. Because if you know the current, you know the way the ocean moves, your canoe is going to be pointed in a certain direction relative to the swells. And so basically he can just feel that they're pointed in the right direction. Basically, there is a story about how he was sort of asleep under the deck, and woke up and came up on board, and he's like, "You're off course," because he could feel the way the boat was moving relative to the swells, and he knew that they were going in a slightly wrong heading. There's other stuff too, like in the movie, they know they're getting close to land because they see a bird, and of course you can tell by the types of birds. Some birds will venture farther out into the ocean. You can know how close you are to land. You can tell from again, the swells are going to change when you get closer to land, because if there's land masses hidden under the water, that's going to change the way the waves behave. You can tell from the clouds, because the clouds are going to interact with, heat rising off the land, and it's going to change the way the clouds behave. And basically, you can tell where the land is beyond the horizon based on all these different factors. And so it's really interesting how there's so many different little ways that they use to navigate. And you put that all together, and they say it's navigating almost more based on feel. It's more of an art than a science once you know how to do it this way, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Yeah, and there's a lot of interesting experimental archaeology on canoes that's taking place quite recently in the Mediterranean. They recently found dugout canoes dating back 7,000 years or so, I think. And there's a Czech archaeologist who did the experiment, and he crossed the Aegean Sea in a dugout canoe.
Wow.
in 2003, I think it was. And he made it through a replica of one of those that was found.
And when we talk about these canoes, like canoes are really common in North America here. They're like 15 or 20 feet long. We're talking about canoes that are just huge, right? Like they're made out of trees that like you don't even get to see trees that big anymore, right?
Yeah, I did find a picture now of it, and it's like 4, 9, 10 people in it.
Wow.
Yeah. There's a dugout canoe like that I saw at the at a museum in Novi Sad in Serbia, which is it's like a huge tree trunk that's carved out, and it's like huge to be sitting beside it. I can't remember how long it is. It's like 50 feet long or something. It's really big.
Are they single pieces or are they multiple pieces?
Yeah, the one I saw it's like one huge tree trunk that's carved into a canoe.
And these ones too, they actually did travel 500 kilometers, 20 paddlers.
Holy cow.
From the Greek islands of Samos to the coast of Turkey. So these expeditions still take place.
How long did that take them?
Oh, it's not specified. Not 101 days or whatever it was Heyerdahl did, but...
Yeah, another thing the movie leaves out is sort of at the end of the trip, they just get to the island and then the movie's over. But in actuality, on day 97, they passed an island where they saw people on land and were sort of waving and communicating to them, but they weren't able to make landfall there because they couldn't steer their boat.
Oh,
and so they drifted for 4 more days until they hit the next island, right?
So frustrating.
When they got to that island, the island where they landed was uninhabited, so they sort of camped out there for a couple of weeks. They had their radio, of course. And then people from another adjacent island had seen like wreckage from their raft wash up on their island, and so they went to investigate and they found them there, and then they brought them back to their other island, and then they hung out with them for a few days until their rescue party came to get them. And so, I mean, that's all pretty interesting stuff. Obviously those people on that island were pretty capable of navigating between islands on their own, which again is kind of overlooked.
Yeah. Could you imagine if people were like barbecuing or cooking over fire or something on the beach and you can smell it walking towards you and you could just see them all eating, having this feast, and you just slowly sail by in your raft that you can't steer after 97 days? Oh.
Eating your powdered tomato soup. Well, overall, what do we think about this movie? I got 2 questions for us. In terms of just the movie itself, is this a good movie? Is this an enjoyable movie to watch? And in terms of impact, do you think that this movie is... I'm trying to frame this question without giving away my feelings about the whole thing in the question. Is this movie okay? Basically.
Well, compared to the other movies that we watched, this one is entertaining. It's good. It's beautiful, right? There's some beautiful scenes. I think it's fine. I didn't watch it at double speed, which is always a good sign. But then once you Google it and you learn all this backstory stuff, then you start to go, ugh. So I don't know.
Yeah, it wasn't really my style of movie. Too little happening.
Yes, well, you should watch some of the movies that we have to watch.
Yeah, but I mean, it was all right. It was well made, well produced, interesting concept. I mean, if Heyerdahl just have decided that he wanted to sail a boat or raft from South America to Polynesia and without all the racist ideas and all of that, it would have been an interesting, movie about human endurance, but it left a bit foul taste afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't already know the archaeology of Polynesia, then if you watch this movie, you're gonna come away thinking that he proved Polynesia was settled from South America, and that's just unforgivable. To just present this movie and being like, I've got this theory. Everyone's like, oh, no, your theory is wrong. He's like, I'm gonna prove it. And then you get to the end and then it's over.
Yeah.
You have to say he was wrong, or else you're intentionally deceiving people. I think it's just unforgivable to me. I was watching the movie and I'm like, I wonder what they're going to say at the end. And I knew that they couldn't, because it just ruins the whole movie to be like, wow, what a great movie, you guys. Turns out he was wrong. Good night.
But they could have,
You know?
they could have made the movie more accurate in that they could have had put in the racist parts of his hypothesis, made him out to be kind of a like a bad guy, right? Or like an anti-hero, or not an anti-hero, but like, you know, like he thinks he's the hero of the movie, but you don't like what he's doing. Still an entertaining movie. All of that stuff could still happen. And then at the end, say that he was wrong and give some idea of actually what happened, right? Like that's actually probably a better, more interesting movie.
Yeah, I don't think it would have been approved by Liv Heyerdahl, for example, if they tried to do that.
Yes, it is. So.
Yeah. Or Thor Heyerdahl himself. He only died in 2002. I read that the director or the writer, somebody involved in this movie, had wanted to make this movie since the 90s and was actually talking to Thor Heyerdahl to get the rights to the movie. And so I'm sure that they wouldn't have been able to make this movie if they said anything bad about him.
Okay, so what do you guys think of it?
The shark CGI is amazing. I believe that all of those sharks were CGI and they all looked real. Like it looked like Discovery Shark Week. Those sharks looked so good to me. The movie is kind of boring at times though, because really not much happened on this raft. They had to again, the crazy thing is that the crazy stuff that happened really did happen. All the mundane interpersonal drama didn't happen. And so it is crazy that they lived through storms. They basically had sharks following them the whole time, at least in Heyerdahl's own account. So, I mean, it sounds like there should be a lot of a story, but realistically, when 2/3 of your movie is just people sitting on a raft floating in the middle of the ocean, it kind of does drag a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
true.
it should have been shorter, less rafting, more other stuff.
It is pretty long for a movie, too. They probably could have cut down 20 minutes of floating in the ocean.
Yeah,
right?
but then you don't get a feature-length movie.
I think most movies could be an hour and a half and be better movies for it.
Thanks for joining us on this episode, Fredrik.
And for recommending this movie.
Well, I actually recommended this one because I knew that you had already done research for Kon Tiki on an episode of your show. And I don't know if we can talk about it. I know that you had a little bit of conflict with the Kon Tiki Museum as well, because we had previously talked about that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Can you say anything about that? That might be a fun story if you're allowed to talk about what happened.
I mean, I'm not sure how much I should say about it, but especially when you criticize Thor Heyerdahl, he has his fans in Norway still. And I think there is an issue where people can't read old texts and look at them with modern perspectives, because I don't think Thor Heyerdahl was a racist, but what he wrote was racist.
Yeah.
When we look at it with modern eyes, and I'm not sure if it's only here in Scandinavia, but I'm sure there's in America and in Canada too, this idea that sometimes we can't look at text from a new perspective because reasons. You like the person, or the idea is good, but you don't want to shuffle out. I would have been perfectly fine if Heyerdahl would have at one point said, okay, I wrote this, it wasn't great, I was in the 1930s, 1940s, these wasn't really good ideas, but he never went back on them. He never changed his mind, he still believed it and still promoted it until his death, more or less. And I think those who support Heyerdahl and like his works don't want to really deal with that part of his legacy. They want to focus on the Kon Tiki story that we saw in the movie, that he was this person who had this fantastic idea and proved it right, so to say. I think there's where conflict can arise regarding this.
Right. When they're trying, those old ideas are being upheld rather than just placed in the past where they're supposed to be, and then taking what you can from them.
we've talked about this before, how racism is a thing bad guys do, right? And so like in our society, when you hear the word racist, you're like, bad guys are racist. I'm not a bad guy, therefore I can't be racist. And it becomes very black and white. Mm-hmm. But it's not like that at all, right? Racism is a structural part of society that affects everybody, right? So we can look at, everybody in the 1940s was racist, right? It's like we're coming right out of World War II. It's just a incredibly racist time, right?
Yeah.
Not that racism still exists in our society today. It's not like Nazis are racists, Nazis are bad guys. Hitler's a Nazi, Hitler's a racist, Hitler's a bad guy. If you're not a Nazi, if you're not Hitler, you're not a bad guy, you're not a racist. It doesn't work like that, right? So all of science was racist in the 1940s. I'm citing a lot of stuff from the early 20th century in my PhD thesis. You have to read that, understanding its context, but also understanding that it's wrong, and just living in that space in between, right? So it's not that Thor Heyerdahl was a racist. His ideas were racist because lots of science was racist at the time, and his was a little worse because it was a little less scientific than the good science going on at the time, right? And so yeah, he's a European white guy talking about indigenous people, theorizing about indigenous people. There's going to be racism in his ideas. It's not that he's a bad guy or that he's a racist. It's just that that's the way society was and the way society still is, right?
No, and I think that needs to be dealt with, that we don't look at these ideas from a vacuum, that we just sort out the bad ideas, but we need to address them and what you think might be good. Look at it with nuance and not trying to ignore the bad parts.
Mm-hmm. All right, Fredrik. Well, thanks for joining us here. Where can our listeners find more of your work?
So the best place to find me is through my website, diggingupancientaliens.com. And the podcast is named the same thing on all the media platforms. And there's also a TikTok, Digging Up Ancient Aliens, posting videos mostly about runestones, like going out, looking at them, talking about them. That's my real background, the Scandinavian Viking Age.
Well, when we had you on for Atlantis before, we talked about maybe having you back to talk about some sort of Viking movie. Maybe you'd like to join us again in the future and do something more closely related to your actual archaeology experience.
Yeah, that would be fun. Found it a bit amusing that one of the actors from the TV series Vikings was in this movie.
Oh, really? I hadn't seen that series.
No, it was a bit fun.
Do you have questions, comments, or movie requests? We want to hear from you. Find us on Blue Sky and Facebook at SOTSA Podcast. Send us an email to screensofthestoneage@gmail.com or visit our website at screensofthestoneage.com.